Thank you for taking interest in this webinar. This video is just to explain its content a little bit better. So firstly, as you know, it's a webinar about using NVivo for a literature review. And the first question that may arise is, what kind of literature review do I mean? So is it for a systematic literature review or just a regular, normal literature review? So let me explain the difference between the two, and this is also something I address in the webinar itself. So firstly, by normal or regular literature review, I mean any literature review that most of us have to do prior to their study. So if you're planning any kind of academic study, for example, one based on interviews, you are expected to review the literature, as you know, and later write the literature review chapter or section. In fact, reviewing the literature usually starts way before this moment, because in order to even have an idea for a research study, a good rationale to determine if there is any gap in knowledge, you do need to start with reviewing the literature. So that's the normal literature review that I mean. The second type is a systematic literature review, which is a method in itself. So in a systematic literature review, the literature is your data. So you're not conducting interviews, you're conducting a systematic literature review. For example, to develop a theory, to see what the existing studies lack, or what we know, what we learned from the existing studies of identity. Let's say you want to determine what factors influence the development of identity, and for that you're treating the literature as your data, and you can develop your own theory based on that. The webinar aims to help those who are interested in both these types of literature reviews. So the knowledge covered in the webinar will help you do any kind of literature review, including the systematic literature review and including the regular, normal literature review that I just defined. And in fact, I did not do a systematic literature review for my PhD study. I conducted a study that included other forms of data collection. However, I remember one of my biggest regrets after the PhD, or in the final stages of the PhD, when I realized how powerful NVivo is, because I was analyzing my interview data. So the regret was that I didn't know about these options. I didn't know about this software when I was doing my literature review. So in year one, basically, when I was expected to review large volumes of the literature. Feel free to have a look at the list of topics covered in this webinar, but as the list says, the webinar is for both complete beginners and those who have used NVivo, but just not for a literature review. So I'll start with the basics, how to bring in your data. I'll explain the layout of the software, where to find things. I'll explain how to import the data and how to organize it into folders and sets. I'll describe the difference between these two things, and then we'll get to code the data. I will run through everything related to coding, so creating codes and merging codes, moving codes, organizing them into groups, and I'll explain two, in my opinion, main approaches in which you may apply when analyzing this kind of data, when analyzing the literature. So two main approaches to coding, what to code and how to code that. And then in addition to coding, I'll cover classifications, attributes, and values. So that's the second major way in which you can approach the task of organizing and analyzing your literature. So these in a nutshell, these classifications and values and attributes are about characteristics, so assigning characteristics to your literature. NVivo will not know whether a certain source, a certain article was published in 2012 or 2006. You have to let NVivo know, so to speak. And same applies to any other characteristics which you will decide. So you'll decide whether perhaps you want to organize your literature into empirical and theoretical, or maybe literature that sees identity as a flexible concept and literature that sees identity as a fixed and stable context. So there are no limits to all these classifications that you may decide to create and assign. And the advantage of this is, apart from creating a nice list of your data, a nice table of what kind of data you have in your literature review, you can later run so-called queries. So these are little investigations and little tests based on, for example, coding and these characteristics. So as I said in the description of the webinar, you can, for example, explore how the definitions of identity changed over years. So you can compare the definitions of identity, which would be your code, against these different attributes and values, which would be the years of publication. And the webinar concludes with a Q&A section. As I said in the description, I always make sure to answer every single question, so do not hesitate to ask me questions. I love answering these questions. This webinar is for you, and I'm there for you in the webinar. So the Q&A can actually take some time. It's between 15 and 30 minutes, so make sure to leave some time, some extra time, just in case after the webinar, if we have to stay longer and discuss your questions. So that is all about this webinar. I hope that it's clear now to you what the webinar is about, and I really hope to see you there.